Internet. Hi, Foundry people. You're here for a panel called Breaking into the U.S. Market as an International Writer, a topic that I'm sure we will interrogate the title of shortly. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves briefly. We had and then lost Agana Ipeki was here just a second ago. Hopefully will rejoin us as we go on in these first few minutes. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start with Zui Ning. If you want to just give a brief intro where you are, where you're writing from.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Zui Ning. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a Malaysian editor, writer, book reviewer, occasional theatre maker, usually based in London, the UK, but currently back in Malaysia. I write spec fic with a focus on history, climate, post-colonialism. Yes, I'm just going to stop there. I've given a lot of introductions today.
That's it. Oh, hey, there's Chobay. I hope you can hear us as well. Evgenia?
Hello, I'm Evgenia Triandafilou. I am a Greek writer of mostly dark fiction. I don't know what else to say. My pronouns are she, her.
Just ending right there. She's also like a really great writer. Chobay, we're just doing intros right now.
Okay. My name is Zogenechoe Donald-Epeki. I'm an African speculative fiction writer and editor in Nigeria. I edited the first ever year's best African speculative fiction anthology, the Dominion Anthology, the Bridging Worlds non-fiction anthology, and the Africa Reason anthology, forthcoming on Tor.com in November. I've been nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula Awards and a bunch of awards.
Nice. All right, cool. So just to jump into it, as I said at the beginning, this title is already a little questionable for all of us. I assume if we're an international writer, then where is a national writer from? I think we kind of know what that means. But it is inevitable that anybody writing from outside the center of empire is going to be marginalized in ways that intersect with each other, or at least disadvantaged in ways that can be uniting to us, I suppose, as professionals, as peers. Something I wanted to do is to get a little bit of y'all's local flavor of how that works. So what I'd like to do is kind of go around and ask you guys to talk about what the local regional attitudes that you encounter towards U.S. publishing. I believe it was Ogunchove was saying in our email. Oh wait, maybe it was Sweeney. Who knows who it was? A brilliant person said in our email chain that there's this idea, certainly here in the Philippines, that you haven't made it until you've published in the U.S. or you've published with the U.S. publisher or the UK or what have you. What is your particular experience with that relationship between the local and the U.S. publishing industry, and how has that shaped your own writing and your career? How do you react to that experience? I'm gonna throw that to Zui Ning first, just to be mean. I don't know.
Yeah,
Take it away.
definitely. There is a sense of legitimacy that comes with being internationally published, especially for Anglophone literature. Locally speaking, at the most local level of my country, readership is shockingly low because we do not cultivate a culture of reading. So firstly, if you want to publish locally, it is very difficult to sell books because nobody is reading books. The concept of a local library is not very existent. So, or if it does exist, it's like books from 50 years ago, if you're lucky, and you're definitely not getting anything from the last 10 years in there. That's just broadly speaking. There are a couple of good bookstores, but they're usually like really big chain ones like Kinokuniya, and a couple of local ones like Gerak Budaya, who are kind of like living day by day and trying to do the best they can. there's also, like I just mentioned on the previous panel, like a segregation of languages in my country, which means that if you're writing Anglophone literature, only a very specific subset of people do read it or want to read it, because most people want to read something in a different language when they read at all. And if you're writing fiction, yeah, people don't see well, in as with many parts of the world, people don't sort of see that either as a career, a legitimate thing. Writing is not a legitimate thing. Don't talk about anything like editing. The concept of editing is extremely minimal, if at all. Regionally, it's up and down, slightly different. Things are slightly better in Singapore because there's been some investment to the infrastructure of the arts there, and there's and I think what is really missing for us is both, firstly, people who read, but also a community of criticism around that reading, because that's something that pushes the work along, when writers can respond to other people who are also using literary techniques in order to investigate and articulate what's going on around us. And that's the part that's really falling down for my country specifically. So I'll say a very bleak prospect. And that's also why a lot of people who do want to make it as English writers migrate or look for something somewhere else, because the market is just so much bigger out there and people will actually be able to read what they write.
It's a really good point, and kind of, I mean, brain drain is a big issue here in my country. I know in a lot of places too, and can lead to a kind of fraught relationship to our various diasporas and them to us, and so. That's a whole can of worms. Yeah. Aganachoa, do you want to touch on kind of like a U.S. and local literary scene relationship?
Okay. Well, I'll first touch on the title, breaking into US publishing. First thing I'll say is you don't break into US publishing, it breaks you. I thought of that because in the last panel someone mentioned that I was successful in breaking, in publishing in the US, and I was like, oh. And I had to do a little bit of an immediate consideration of my trajectory so far, and my conclusion was that I didn't break into it; it broke me. Now, that aside, the question now about the interplay between local publishing and international publishing, and it's been centered in the US. Well, I can say all the all the usual things, how lacking publishing is on the continent, all the problems. But the truth is that, yeah, I would have to place it within the context that it exists in, because it exists within the context. And that context is that of a colonized and impoverished, deliberately impoverished and colonized continent. Nigeria is literally the poverty capital of the world. Lots of people are out of school. I think we have the largest number of out of school children too in the world. Lots of people are not literate. So what kind of reading culture are you going to have, or a literary culture can you have in a place like that? Obviously, it's going to be, very limited, which it's not a reflection on the people or the place at all. Someone recently, funny enough, locally, one of our local celebrities or some said recently that literature is dead or dying on the continent, and I was like, it's doing its best. It's on life support. But it was sort of putting the blame on the people. There's all this talk of, we must not make the West the center, but I feel like that's missing the context, because at the core of it, art is a business. It's meant to keep people alive, or art will not survive. The artist has to be alive to invent new art, to create new stuff, so people want to get paid. So I sort of tend to think of it as writers on the continent are very vibrant, they are very brilliant. I can list hundreds of people putting out the most amazing works you can't imagine, and they're all struggling to get into a very narrow door, to get into Macmillan or Penguin or Random House or Bloomsbury or any number of Western and American publishers, which isn't because they see the West as some kind of El Dorado, but because those companies are literally the biggest publishing companies on earth. They call them the big five. They have money, and people want to get paid for their art. So naturally they go where the money is. It's the same way anybody wants to work in Google or Microsoft or the big tech companies. So but yeah, publishing on the continent is rather limited, which is understandable. There are not many people on the continent that can buy your books. Myself, I wasn't buying books. I couldn't afford books. I grew up on a diet of secondhand books and old, musty library books. Yeah, so that's the whole interplay of publishing here, local publishing. It's mixed up with all the poverty and yeah, everything. So
Totally. And Evgenia, do you want to jump in there a bit?
Yeah, what Training and Ognechowa said, they like hurt me to my core because we also don't have libraries, especially fiction libraries in Greece. We do have some university libraries that have books on its, topic on the university, but we can't borrow books from anywhere. And when I was in Clarion West in Seattle, people talked about borrowing books and putting this book up for borrowing. And it was, all mind blowing because if I want to read a book, I'll have to pay for it. And if I want to read a print book, I will have to pay like triple the value in customs. So I have to buy ebooks for most of the time. But Greece does have a difference compared to other countries in the sense that we are not very, like, we do get very influenced from the US, but US in Greece is like Mars. It's like uh, when I started 10,000 years ago writing, that's 2010, nobody thought anybody ever would ever get published in the US. That was like not possible because the idea was that you cannot write in English if it's not your first language, or at least if you have not lived in an English speaking country for a few years. So when in 2012 I said, "Oh, I'm going to start writing in English," there was this translator who told me, you cannot do that. And I was about to move to Sweden then. And I said, okay, I'm going to move to Sweden. He said, okay, then after a few years, you will be able to write in Swedish. You cannot write in Swedish. But yeah, like if you wrote something in English, people would come and point out some typos you did and say, that's why you cannot write in English, because you made a few typos. So that was a completely like alien idea. And after the crisis, there were a lot of self-published presses that came up. So people self-publish a lot of books, especially SF books, because there's a very small readership here for SF books. There is generally a small readership, but when it comes to science fiction, fantasy, and horror, it's even smaller. So people tend to pay in vanity presses to publish their books and sell them to their family and friends mostly. So basically, I had to ignore everybody and start writing in English and like pray or hope for the best. And now, after a few Greek writers who are basically my peers because we started around the same time getting published abroad. Now people start sending their works, translating their works in English, through other people, other translators, all trying to write in English themselves. Before, it was not even a concept that existed. There was no road in the publishing, moving from Greek publishing to the US. It was just, you are a Greek writer, you either pay someone to publish you, or you're like a genius Nobel winning writer, and you are dead 50 years ago. That was the situation. So that's us.
Americans just they love dead Greek people, is my understanding, especially if they're ancient.
It feels
Those
like
guys
it's
are
mostly
dead
dead Greek
50 years
people.
ago.
Mm.
Are they nice?
I'm talking about a couple of writers that won the Nobel Prize who were Greeks, and
Yeah, no, like how do you interact with them? Like
seance, mostly the Saturday of Souls, where you go to the cemetery with food.
Oh, we have that here too. Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense.
Totally. All right. So, necromancy aside, I thought we could jump off that a little bit and talk about like the act of writing in English, which is different depending on where we're all coming from. So, here in the Philippines, English is my first language. I'm Filipino American. I live in the Philippines, but for a lot of writers here in the Philippines, English was one of their first languages. But for some people, it's their second, their third, their fourth, and so on and so on. In some places in the world, it's an official language of the country, or it's the language of education, or it's the language of the erudite and the rich, or it's not a local language whatsoever. Or, and Sweeney talked about this in the panel just before ours, you have what's academically termed like world English, like a world English is. We have, the Taglish here, Singlish in Singapore, and so on and so forth. And you mentioned Sencho writing in pretty successfully, I think, in such a mode in Big Five publishing recently. Is this something that has affected how each of you write, and how do you think that's impacted your publishing journey within, trying to be published with American publishers specifically? Sweeney, did you want to expand on that and kind of what you were talking about in the previous panel? I expect all of you to have done your homework and watched the previous panel.
Yeah, sure. So contextually, English is one of it's my first language. Of the several languages I speak, everyone here speaks a few languages. It's not an uncommon thing. But we do speak English because colonialism, but also because American cultural hegemony. And the thing is, contextually, English in my country, for instance, in my parents' time, was most people spoke English because they were taught through an English medium in their own schools. But then language became a political issue, and then the education system started flipping between Malay as a national language versus English. So every few years, all the textbooks change in their languages, and you learn science and math in Malay for a few years, and then after that you learn science and math in English again for a few years, which obviously does nothing for any of those subjects or for your knowledge of English. So I was lucky in that both my parents were of the English educated era, and then they gave me a lot of books when I was younger, and all the books were in English. So I actually grew up while speaking like the specific Creole kinds of world Englishes that we speak with people locally. I actually had a very strong proper English, or British and American English understanding. And the thing that I actually had to do when I started writing was to untangle myself from that extremely correct English, because none of my characters and none of the world setting is in that very sort of colonial or Western setting. and none of these characters should be speaking any kind of proper English. So I actually had to kind of work backwards from that and really listen back to how people speak here with the sort of various grammatical quirks and like lingo that we use to utilize the kind of English that we do locally. And obviously the local English are all looked down on because they're not real or proper English. So whenever people now it's slightly better because now there's a bit more of a movement to like reclaim or embrace how we speak locally. But prior to that, there was definitely a kind of snobbishness in local literary circles where it's like, oh, why do you want to talk like that? You know, and shouldn't you talk in proper English like the Queen does? And it's like, well, yeah. So, but yeah, so actually it's been kind of like what we were saying in the previous panel, kind of decolonization of the self as well, to kind of reckon with what English is for you, what it sounds like, and also how the I guess for me the code switching of other languages works. What does that mean for an audience that may or may not speak all those languages, and how does that translate to them contextually? So it's still an ongoing process for me with that. I still default a lot to proper English when I'm doing discussions because I talk to a lot of people in the UK and US, and they wouldn't know how to follow me if I talk any other way. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Trova, did you want to jump in? I know you're in that discussion as well.
Yeah, like I found what Zoe said to be very, very profound. There's something, your language, language is colonized as well. And it's sort of a taking of your culture when they replace your language with their language, the language of the colonizer. Now the thing is that you cannot completely colonize a place or a thing down to the last embers, for example, and those little bits, those gaps where colonization fails, they constantly continue to show and chaff at decolonized bits. For example, we're speaking English, but there are a lot of concepts, there are a lot of ideas, there are a lot of things that cannot be represented in English. So when you're trying to get into, foreign markets, you're trying to get into the big five, trying to get into magazines by, British or American editors, those little bits are going to create a disconnect. For example, in Nigeria, we have the Iroko tree. If we're going to say something is tall, I'm going to say as tall as an Iroko tree. And the American or the British editor might not know what an Iroko tree is. So there's a disconnect. And you might not realize it, but there are thousand Iroko trees in your language. Because where you live, those things were not colonized, they were not eroded or replaced with an American or a British equivalent or the equivalent in the language. That's why your English is mixed with a lot of things that still remain your distinct culture, because yeah, your culture, your language is made up of your culture. So now for Zui, where there's a disconnect is because, yeah, you're trying to be authentic, authentic to your culture instead of the English one. So, and that's something that we also encounter a lot because Nigeria was colonized. I mean, we've been speaking English in our schools. There wasn't even a disconnect. We've always spoken English. A lot of people can speak English more than their native languages. It's been our official language since forever. But there's still, this issue that makes our English sort of less authentic, according to Western, readers, editors, publishers, but it's actually authentic to us. It's Nigerian English with Nigerian culture in the language. The bits of the culture that were not colonized, that cannot be colonized. So I feel like that's what Zoo is moving towards, more towards those bits. And it just so turns out it's one of the misfortunes of publishing that those very little bits of your culture that make you authentic to your true self will create a disconnect between you and Western publishing. That's on the traditional publishing sphere. Then should you decide to go, self-publishing, nobody can tell me what to do, traditional publishing, self-publishing, I can do what I like. That's not exactly true, because they're colonizing you on a whole other sphere, which involves finance and publishing systems and payment methods. For example, in Nigeria, PayPal, Kickstarter, GoFundMe, Draft to Digital, Smashwords, Patreon don't work. That's literally all the platforms. I could go on and on. They've worked at some point, they've not worked, they've had horrid restrictions, they've stolen my monies over and over, kicked me out of their platforms for no reason. I've had to carry out some kind of campaign or war against them. So they sort of make it impossible for you to get paid. So it's just sort of it's a tug of war. It's a constant tug of war that you never really win. You just survive it. In order to not let your art die. You're caught in the tug of war, and your art is the casualty. If they pull you over, your art dies. For example, my anthologies are completely free now online. I'm not getting paid for them. Which in turn inhibits my survival, because I need to pay for drugs. I'm disabled. I need to eat the kind of food that keeps my immune system up. I need to pay my bills. I need to live somewhere, So it's like I have to choose between my art and my survival, because the Western publishing sphere has made it impossible for me to get paid. Which is why initially I said you don't break into the into American publishing, it breaks you. But then what are the alternatives? On the other end of the spectrum, there's an impoverished country and continent, there's out of school kids, there's elite people who are not literate, there's not a system that is enough to, so yeah, again, it's down to the age old, it's a battle, your art or your survival. I think I may have rambled and gotten away from the point a bit. Sorry.
That's fine. It's a very big topic, and I think that was all definitely under our umbrella, and things that we definitely want to touch on. Um, Again, I want to give you a chance to talk about language a little bit if you want to, but I also uh, kind of wanted to pivot after that. I have notes that I can't read what I wrote, but yeah, did you want to talk a little bit just about the reception that you found, um, maybe not now, but perhaps earlier in your career, just in terms of being from a country where English is not considered a first language generally?
Okay, do you mean reception or lack of reception?
Oh, I'm sorry. Either, well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, definitely. There's, people come here from, I know a lot of folks that go to university in the States, live here in the Philippines. English was their first language. And the first thing you always have to do, I'm sure you guys know this, is take the English proficiency test, the English as a second language test. Even if perhaps, you've published novels in English, still they want you to take the English proficiency test. So
there's
yeah.
an expiry on the English proficiency test.
There
It's the thing
is.
that I don't understand. Your language proficiency expires after a certain number of years, and then you pay again to take it.
Oh, that is such a
Do
scam.
they think that you forget how to speak the language?
It's like you have to put a new token in the parking meter.
It's like language is like food. If you put it on the
It
shelf for a long time,
expires,
it
yeah,
expires.
like
Yeah.
oh,
Oh my Lord Almighty! Yeah, that's a scam.
You know,
That's a scam.
that's exactly what they keep putting blockers. I've been trying to get into an MFA in the US for about 3 years consistently. I've applied to dozens of schools consecutively every year. I've avoided the ones that insist on proficiency tests because there's no way I'm going to pay to show you that I can speak a language that I've been awarded on 3 continents in. So, and I've been consistently rejected. I'm not even going to go into that. But talking about language, there's this belief that they don't understand. Like I said earlier, your culture is in your language, and then when they see those bits of cultures, they decide that it's inauthentic. It's inferior. Nigerian English. You know, like Zui. Most of my characters, my prose is usually filled with something we call pidgin English. It's the kind of English that is speaking here, that is spoken here. It's not straight, Queen's English. It's vernacular, you know. But it's what the average person here would talk in. They wouldn't speak, English that was correct, or that was following the grammar norms of, what's taught in class. So when I have my characters talk like that, I usually get feedback from editors saying, it's what's the word? It's the dialogue. They can't connect to the dialogue. It's unrealistic, or they don't get the humor, or they don't. So a lot of the time, Western publishing fails to account for culture. It fails to account for the culture in your work, and it tends to decide that it's inferior English. So when you were talking about reception, it's more of a lack of reception. You have to struggle against all those things. It's not just it's publishers, it's editors, it's reviewers. You get a lot of terrible reviews. It's readers. So yeah, yeah, that's what it's been.
Yeah, no, I hear that. Evgenia, do you wanna jump in on that at all?
Yeah, in Greece, we have, only Greek as first language, which uh, it is a sort of combination of ancient Greek and various other languages, because Greece has been through a lot of historical changes. Like we have a lot of Arabic and Turkish words, and some French and Italian and Latin, and some pre-Greek words that are here for thousands of years. So English and French and German are taught mostly as second languages, as foreign languages. And Greek people of my generation which I'm pretty old, started started speaking English in a better level. Before that, Greeks would not speak English, and there was this wave of you have to learn foreign languages, as Greece was becoming more and more a tourist destination, basically, because that's the industry here. So I want to say that Greeks, even though my generation speaks English, and the younger people speak better, they don't read in English. They don't read fiction in English. They prefer to speak, or if they have to do something and write down some application, or if they move away, but they still prefer to read in Greek. And it was very hard for me to start reading fiction in English and get my mind into that. Now, when it comes to writing and publishing, I think that before I started publishing, when I was in some critique circles that were, mostly Americans or generally English-speaking people, I learned early that if I added Greek words in the dialogue or in the narration, people would not understand. Like, even if it was one word in 3 paragraphs, they would be like, what is this? Please explain this to me. So even though I want to I have a novella out in Uncanny, The Giants of the Violet Sea, and it has some made up stuff, like stuff that don't actually exist, like it's a mashup of Greek culture or whatever. I just say the words in English and string them together. Nobody complained that they don't understand them. But if I put one Greek word in there, they will be like, okay, what is that? Even if the word is Satan in Greek and it's the same word just with a couple of letters in the end. So from the critique circles, I got that if I have to write something that's a Greek word or a word that sounds foreign, I have to explain it tediously for people to get into the. So I got into a different mode and started being more immediate and saying, okay, this thing is this. In this story, there's a flying cow. And in Greece, we call flying cows like this. Okay, now let's move on and keep using that word. So that's how I started dealing with that problem. And it has worked a little bit better now.
Is there a word for that?
We don't have flying cows.
You know flying cows in Greece? Oh.
No, we only have flying horses. Pegasus.
Oh.
Yeah.
I guess I would be a tourist for the horses, but the cows. So I think this is a little bit of, a complaint session,
Sorry,
but it's
are
fine.
they expensive? The flying horses. Like, can you ship some to Nigeria?
I think it depends on the currency conversion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Also, if there is wind,
guess.
maybe the flying, they will go a little
I need
bit.
to come over one time to see your flying horses.
Exactly. All right. I wanted to get us into some things where we can give people like concrete stuff. Because one thing in my experience is that when you talk to other writers who haven't yet even perhaps tried to submit to Western markets, there's a perception that you're simply not allowed, or that it's just completely impossible. And I think, it is really hard. There's, as we've been talking about, there's a lot of bullshit that you deal with, but it's possible. I'd love to hear if y'all wanted to name some names on places, editors, publishers who, for you, have done, you think, well by their non-US, non-UK authors, um, as much as you've encountered. Sweening, do you want to start us off there?
It's like that I'm just trying to think who specifically who is American, who has done that really well. Honestly, I don't think anybody has done it like incredibly, just because not due to any fault of the publishers sometimes, but just because of the way like systems work. For instance, when I review for Strange Horizons, I still get paid through PayPal because they don't have enough money to do an ACH system. But also that means I lose a lot of money from PayPal platform fees, which is not Strange Horizons' fault, but it's also just one of the things of when you're international, you just get undercut a lot because of like the way money changes hands across countries. So it's just one of those like that's how it is. But I would say one of the mostly good things about US publishers is that they are not citizenship restricted, which I'm very grateful for. They really shouldn't be. But I have encountered other places where they are, and that has made it much more difficult to get into those places. So that's one of the good things. I'd say there are, if I remember correctly, I think like Claren West and places like that. Even though it's very expensive to go if you want to go in person, and that's something we can also talk about with community. A lot of their online courses do say things like, oh, if you are like a marginalized creative person, you can email them and they can give you like a spot if there's a spot left to be given. And that those are things that I feel are good initiatives because US currency is like 1 to 4 to my currency. And I'm like, and every time I look at a workshop that I need to pay for, I'm like, wow, I cannot justify paying for this. So so I think a lot of those sort of financial assistance is something that is really good to have. I'm also one of the readers on Choreo, and I feel like the founding editor as Ola, as well as the editors on that are really good. I think Eugenia, you've got a story on there last year, which I saw, that's a really good one. They are specifically for immigrant diaspora writers, and as a result, the editing and the care. Hello. Yeah, the editing and the care that goes into the stories also reflects the care that they take towards both international as well as diaspora and transnational authors. I'm gonna stop there first and have a think a bit more since you sprung that.
No, that's great. That's great. I totally agree. And I've in addition to the reviewing at Strange Horizons, I think the current fiction editors, Vashra Chandrasekhara for one, have been really great at trying to foster a more international masthead as well as a national cohort of writers, which I've really appreciated. Choba, did you want to try
Oh
and
yeah,
drop some
yeah.
names?
Yeah, not just names, maybe just general about the payment issue. I would say one thing that you need as an international writer is an American friend, because editors, it's a small hack. Editors are overworked. They are paying a ton of writers, they're organizing, they are doing a lot of moving pieces. So the editor of Strange Horizons or Uncanny or Clarksworld isn't going to go to the bank to send you money through Western Union or through some other system that is, more available in your place. And it's not because they're not good people or they're not kind, but because they can't, you know. So it pays you to have an American friend. It sort of shifts the burden if you can. I mean, not everybody has the opportunity. Have an American friend who can pick up the money through PayPal and then at their convenience send it to you, a convenience that the editor might not have, because if you make it difficult for them, subconsciously they'll start to publish international people less and less because they might not even realize they're doing it. It's some of all the hurdles that you have to walk around with publishing. It's not even about a simple case of right or wrong. Like I told you, it's a tussle for survival. you know but Clark's World, I know they publish a lot of international writers, and translations. They made a number of strides. The Dark magazine also publishes a lot of African writers that I'm aware of, and yeah, a lot of writers in the margins. Um, yep. Uh, yeah, for
That's good.
now.
That's good.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
and yeah, I wanted to just drop a final point. You, like I said, it's a tussle, so you really cannot stop. It's more of just a constant pull. So on that note, you can't really focus on one editor precisely. You need to make use of the submissions grinder, the diabolical plot submissions grinder. It shows you a list of magazines, the advanced search option, a list of all the magazines, pay rates, and yeah, all the things you need to know. So you could use that to shoot your work, uh, you know, sort of walk through the entire industry. Yeah, that sounds like a lot. Yeah, yeah, which probably is the only way that you find an editor that can align with your voice, in the way that you want. Yeah, sometimes you have to go through the entire industry, and yeah, so that's
Cast a wide net. Totally.
Oh, on the
exactly.
payment issue, I just want to jump in really quickly to say, if you're an international person, I really recommend that you get Wise. It used to be called TransferWise, and it's basically an international bank where you can have multiple currencies. It doesn't serve every currency, but there's a good number of it. And what happens is that the American publisher can basically send you US dollars to a domestic bank that is yours in Wise, and then you can convert it within Wise into your local currency, and they've got really good rates for that, so you don't lose as much as if you go through like Western Union or PayPal.
I find it pretty easy to use too, and I'm not smart. So, Evgenia, did you want to say anyone that you've had a especially good experience with, or that you've just seen publishing a good amount of
Say that
international authors?
I have recommended Wise sometimes, and it was sort of hard, so we went back to PayPal, unfortunately. Which is, I would blame it more on the system, because many editors are used to, focus on the US writers, so they're sort of cutting corners in their energies to send money in multiple ways. I think that choreo is amazing, and I want to say that, like Juin said, that they published my story as a diaspora writer, and I was in Sweden, so they don't focus on people who are diaspora in the US. You can be diaspora from one random country to another random country, and you are still valid to be published in choreo. Strange Horizons is doing a lot of work, a lot of good work, and Clarksworth, as far as I know. Mermaids Monthly was beginning to, to have an international editing team, but their Kickstarter did not go well. Hopefully, they will come back. This is my hope. And generally, I feel like it does spread to other magazines too, like Uncanny starts taking more international stories. But I think there are some that are on the forefront of that effort. And definitely Strange Horizons and Choreo are two of the most, they're doing the best right now.
Okay, yeah, I just want to jump off something that Eugenia said about why it's having issues. The truth is, a lot of these systems are new. Some of them are startups, and they have bugs. Sometimes they work selectively at select moments. Because I've had to pay like dozens of writers. I've tried most of the payment systems, and I'll tell you, they work selectively. You know, some of the most reliable still is PayPal. So sometimes your money is going to get lost in some of these payment systems, and they're going to hold your money for months trying to verify some idiotic detail or the other. So yeah, they don't always work seamlessly. That's my point. There's Payoneer, there's Wise, there was Zoom, which was even a PayPal service. There's one payment system or the other springing up, and yeah, we're always recommending one or the other, and I just feel like we should always add, that you should be prepared for surprises. Like there's nothing really works the way it's supposed to. Like it's something that you can count on, not to be fatalistic or anything, but yeah. So you
No,
gotta be
yeah,
prepared.
that makes sense. And also, I think be prepared for surprises is a good tagline for us
Yeah.
as we wrap up here. So we're right at the end of our time. I think this was a great discussion. I really it's refreshing to talk to other writers from outside the West just about our stuff and not about American stuff. Is I don't know about you guys, but something I don't get to do a whole lot of. So this was really lovely. If anybody in the chat wants to continue the discussion there, we're in the Toast room on Discord. I'm also kind of writing up a bit of recommendations here that I'll post on there either tonight or tomorrow. My time is midnight here. But I just want to thank all of y'all and Dream Foundry for having us. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. And yeah, thank you guys. This was great.
For modding.
Oh,
Thank you for
as
having
always.
us.
All right. Well,
Nice to
good
see
night,
you.
everyone. I'm going straight to bed. Like,